my channel. My name is Carly Stevens. I'm the author of the young adult fantasy Firian Rising, and this is English Nerd. So today is the first official installment of my Tale of Two Cities series, and I decided as I was looking at how to break this up, rather than doing it in scenes like I did with my All About Hamlet series, if you're interested in checking that out, I decided to split it up by installments in the original journal. So A Tale of Two Cities, when it came out in 1859, did not come out as one complete book. Instead, it came out as installments in a journal called All the Year Round, which Charles Dickens was very closely associated with. So you can think about the original Tale of Two Cities kind of more like a TV series than a movie. So it came out in those installments, and you get some cliffhangers at the end of the installments, just like you would with a TV series. So I'm going to talk about the first official installment of the book today. So that includes the all the introductory material through Book 1, Chapter 3. So a lot of people are not aware that A Tale of Two Cities is actually split up into books and chapters, which was pretty common, and people still do it now. But it has 3 books, and I don't know, I haven't counted the chapters. Lots of chapters. So the A Tale of Two Cities. Again, I mentioned this in the series introduction, but just in case you missed it, the idea behind this is that it's meant to be kind of a study guide or a deep dive into A Tale of Two Cities for not only fans of the book, but also students of it, teachers of it, all of that. So I expect when you come to these videos that it's not a substitute for reading this amazing book, but rather something that enhances your experience of it. So come having read, and I will hopefully add to your understanding and enjoyment of the book. So it says the tale is inscribed to Lord John Russell, so it's dedicated to him. I actually wasn't sure who he was, so I looked it up, and I found this delightful illustration of young Charles Dickens as a clerk and recorder taking notes at a John Russell event where he was speaking because he was a politician in Victorian England at the same time that Dickens, of course, was alive. So I'm not sure how well they knew each other, but it is dedicated to a politician. Which is kind of interesting when we see at the very beginning of the story that Dickens does not pull any punches in his criticism, not only of France, because of course it's set around the French Revolution, the story, but also of England and its potential to go down the same destructive route. Okay, so going forward here, we have the preface to the first edition when it was all bound up and sold as a book. And Dickens explains at the end of the year 1859, which was the same year, by the way, that Darwin's Origin of the Species came out, so that just puts a little context in there for you. He explains that his influences, his inspirations were primarily 2 things. Number 1, it was a play by his friend Wilkie Collins called The Frozen Deep. Charles Dickens played the main character. He was an amateur actor. He really enjoyed being super dramatic, which shouldn't surprise anybody if you've read his stuff. So he played the main character. More on that later on when it becomes relevant. But he was very inspired by that story, and he was also deeply impacted by Thomas Carlyle's account of the French Revolution. Thomas Carlyle was another Victorian writer, but he wrote a lot of things. You can look him up. He was an enormous figure at the time, and also wrote very dramatic, almost prophetic works about what he thought was wrong with the time as well. So it was those 2 things that inspired Dickens to write this book. So then we get book the first, Recalled to Life. Recalled to Life is a really important name for the first book because it clues us into one of the major symbols and images throughout the entire story, which is resurrection. We have all kinds of resurrection images and language starting from the very, very beginning. Even, I would argue, the first really famous sentence of the first chapter. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times, it was the age of wisdom, it was the age of foolishness, etc., etc. It's a huge list of these contradictions. It was the best of times, it was the worst of times. Now, it's a famous first sentence, I think, because it introduces right at the beginning a bunch of paradoxes, and in many ways the idea of resurrection or having life after death or through death or because of death is also a paradox. And so it's kind of high level, I guess, to keep those two things in your mind as you're reading A Tale of Two Cities, but especially when you're looking at the very, very beginning and the very, very end of the story. No spoilers, because I know the book is old. But I don't like spoilers. I hate them. Anyway, the very beginning and the very end both deal with this kind of paradox of how life and death are not mutually exclusive, but in fact there's this paradoxical kind of resurrection. So that sounds very fancy, but trust me, I'll prove it at the end. So it was the best of times, it was the worst of times. And Dickens, after he sets up all those paradoxes, sets up the two countries he's going to be talking about, because of course it's A Tale of Two Cities, which is not the best title for this, I think. It's a pretty lame title, I believe. Sorry, Charlie, but it's true, you could do better. He talks about England and France in very general and kind of dismissive terms. He says, there were a king with a large jaw and a queen with a plain face on the throne of England. There were a king with a large jaw and a queen with a fair face on the throne of France. And everything seemed to be settled forever. Nothing will change, they think. He doesn't say anything about their policies. He doesn't say anything about their personalities. It's just they're literal figureheads that don't have a clue about what's actually going on. Even though the story is mostly about the French Revolution once it really gets going, Dickens is not just going after France and the excesses and the problems that the revolution tried to address and then fell into themselves. He also puts England into the mix by describing it in an almost identical way here at the very beginning of the story. Then he sets up the year at 1775, which, as we Americans know, is quite an influential year, an important year in British and French and American history. And then he goes into a bunch of very specific references to the time and kind of complex metaphors about how the wheels of fate and death are all moving forward and people are about to get caught up. And honestly, it's, on the one hand, it's kind of a beautiful tapestry. On the other, if you don't get all the specific references, it's not the greatest first chapter. It doesn't really suck you in. So I actually just talked to my students about the first page, and then I skipped the rest of the first chapter. And I'm not big into skipping stuff. I just feel like if they read the whole first chapter and they went, what in the world was that, besides a bunch of words that barely made any sense, it would be disappointing, because I feel like they should dive into the action instead. So that's what we're going to do. Chapter 2, the mail. So the mail is a mail coach. It's which is a bit confusing. And the mail coach is making its way to Dover. Now, if you see a map of England and France, obviously there's the English Channel between them, but Dover is on, you've heard of maybe the Cliffs of Dover. It's on the coast of England, almost geographically centered between Paris and London, which are the two cities. So it's kind of cool that really the only time we're in Dover is right at the beginning. It's smack dab in the middle, and people are moving back and forth between them. The tone is really dark. We have two people driving the carriage, and everybody's on edge. And we're introduced to the first major character, Jarvis Lorry, but very slowly. He's described as one of the passengers, and it says in chapter 2, two other passengers besides the one, so there's the one that's important, Lorry, were plodding up the hill by the side of the mail. All three were wrapped up to the cheekbones and over the ears and wore jackboots. Not one of the three could have said from anything he saw what either of the other two was like. And each was hidden under almost as many wrappers from the eyes of the mind as from the eyes of the body of his two companions. Here's another major idea that is huge in all of A Tale of Two Cities. I mentioned resurrection, and I'll show you some of that language in just a second. But the second major idea Dickens introduces us to is that people are really mysteries to each other. They're mysteries to each other and, to a certain degree, mysteries to themselves as well. There are depths that we can't fully comprehend in other people, which can be good or bad. We meet characters in the story that our first impression of them is one way, and they are absolutely the opposite, both positive and negative examples of that. So looking at a person and thinking that you have them all figured out, according to Dickens, is a massive mistake. You do not have them figured out. In fact, there are depths within yourself that you can't know as well until the rubber hits the road. So it's a cool idea, and he makes a big point of it. In fact, the very first sentence of the third chapter, The Night Shadows, says basically what I just told you. A wonderful fact to reflect upon, that every human creature is constituted to be that profound secret and mystery to every other. Which is kind of cool. There's the potential for evil in every person, but there's also the potential for good, for redemption. So just wanted to point that out. A messenger comes up in chapter 2 and has a message for Jarvis Lorry. The message says this: wait at Dover for Mamselle. And Lorry replies, recalled to life. Which is all very cryptic, and if we don't know who they are, then that's rather confusing. But there's that recalled to life, right? That resurrection, which is important. Oh, the messenger is from Tellson's Bank. Of course, Tellson's Bank, we find out, is the place where Jarvis Lorry works. And the messenger, whose name is Jerry Cruncher as well. Jerry Cruncher with the hoarse voice. So, Jerry Cruncher is really bothered by this response. It doesn't make sense to him, and he reacts uncomfortably to it, to say the least. He says, what does he say? Oh, here it is. It's in the third chapter. We follow Jerry just for a moment as he's leaving, the messenger for Tellson's. And he speaks to himself. He says, "No, Jerry, no." He has this harsh voice that he's talking aloud. Said the messenger, harping on one theme as he rode. "It wouldn't do for you, Jerry. Jerry, you honest tradesman. It wouldn't suit your line of business." Recalled. Bust me if I don't think he'd been drinking. I like the little Jerry aside. Normally, I'm not one for omniscient point of view where you just see into everybody's minds and you follow everybody around. But here I really like the little glimpse into Jerry, because he's an important figure later on, and we get some peak Dickens humor in the description that we get of this guy. It says that his head is so spiky that the best of players at leapfrog might have declined him as the most dangerous man in the world to go over. I mean, that's good. That's good stuff. I like that very much. Okay, so anyway, we get back to Jarvis Lorry. Lorry, by the way, the name is meant to be kind of symbolic. Most of Dickens' names are very intentional, either for the sound or the meaning, or both. Jarvis is an old-timey name, even at the time, and we find out, represents an old-timey way of thinking and being. And Lorry is a mode of transportation, and he is going to be one of the people who actually goes back and forth between Paris and London, unlike a lot of the other characters until the end. So Lorry is sleeping in the mail coach because they finally have some traction there in the nasty mud and night, and he has a dream sequence. Now, my students are always a little bit confused by the dream sequence because they're not sure what's dreaming and what's real, but we've all had that experience. You know, you halfway fall asleep in the car while somebody else is driving, and you're having a dream, but you're also kind of aware of what's going on. That's what's happening to Lorry here. And his dream is just various versions of digging up a dead man and asking him, how long were you buried? About 18 years. You know that you're recalled to life. They tell me so. I hope that you care to live. I can't say. And it's just over and over and over again. How long were you buried? Do you want to be recalled to life? So it's another example of that resurrection idea, but now it's almost like a zombie version of it, where this man is not sure that he wants to be recalled to life. He was buried alive, and now Lorry in his dream is digging him up and says, do you care to live? And the man says, I can't say, I don't know. So it's we get a cliffhanger here at the end of chapter 3. It's a mild cliffhanger, but it is a cliffhanger, where Jarvis Lorry says, gracious creator of day, to be buried alive for 18 years. Can you imagine it? And we're just left to think, okay, who must this man be? What does it mean that he's going to recall this man to life? So that's where the section ends. In my edition, it's kind of convenient because we get these stars where the original installment would stop. So if you have any questions at all about the first 3 chapters of A Tale of Two Cities, make sure to put them down below. I really like this book and I would love to have a conversation with you. So that is all I have for you for today. Remember, for the next few weeks or until this series is finished, I will have 2 different videos. Every week I'll have one about A Tale of Two Cities and I'll have one about something else, probably about writing books and things like that. So stay tuned. There will be lots to come from English Nerd. So if you have not already subscribed, make sure you do so, and I'll see you soon. Bye.